The blood on my hands wasn't supposed to be there. Not tonight. Not ever again. I'd left that life behind 2 years ago when I walked away from the emergency room, from the fluorescent lights and the endless parade of broken bodies I couldn't save. Now I was just Dr. Isla Morgan, running a small walk-in clinic in the forgotten corners of the city, treating sprained ankles and seasonal flu, living a quiet life that didn't wake me screaming at 3 in the morning. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor, and on this particular October night, it decided to drag me back into the darkness I'd spent years trying to escape. The clinic had closed an hour ago. I was in the back office, finishing paperwork and preparing to lock up when the glass door shattered. Not from a brick or a baseball, but from the weight of a man's body being thrown through it. He hit the floor hard, scattering shards across the waiting room tiles like deadly confetti. For a frozen moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, my training took over, overriding the fear that tried to root me in place. I grabbed the emergency medical kit from under the reception desk and rushed toward him. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He was conscious, which was something. His eyes were open, dark as midnight and sharp with pain, scanning the room with the kind of awareness that spoke of survival instincts honed by violence. Blood soaked through his white dress shirt, spreading like spilled wine across expensive fabric. His face was all hard angles and shadows, jaw clenched against the pain, a face that belonged on ancient Roman coins or Renaissance paintings of warrior saints, beautiful in a brutal, unforgiving way. The glass door behind me exploded again as 3 men burst through the already shattered entrance. They wore dark suits and darker expressions, guns drawn, scanning the small clinic with professional efficiency. One of them locked eyes with me, and in that moment, I knew I was either going to save this man's life or die trying. Both options seemed equally likely. "Step away from him," the tallest one commanded, his accent thick and Eastern European, his weapon aimed directly at my chest. I didn't move. Couldn't move. My hands were already assessing the wounded man, finding the source of the bleeding. A deep laceration across his ribs, another on his shoulder. Knife wounds, clean and precise. Someone had known exactly where to cut. "I'm a doctor," I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt. "If you kill me now, he dies too. Is that what you want?" The gunman hesitated, exchanging glances with his companions. The wounded man spoke then, his voice a low rasp that somehow carried absolute authority despite his compromised position. "Let her work." 3 words in English, but underneath them, I heard what he didn't say. "Let her work, or you'll answer to me." The guns lowered fractionally, but didn't disappear. I became acutely aware that I was kneeling in broken glass, that my hands were shaking, that this man's blood was warm and wet against my fingers. "I need to get him to the back," I said, forcing myself to meet the lead gunman's eyes. "Better lighting, sterile environment, unless you want him to bleed out on my waiting room floor." Another tense moment of silence, then a curt nod. 2 of the men moved forward, lifting their injured companion with surprising gentleness. I led them to the examination room, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I could see the extent of the damage more clearly. The wounds were deep but controlled, surgical almost in their precision. Whoever had done this had meant to hurt him badly, but not kill him. Not yet, anyway. "I need you all out," I said. pulling on latex gloves with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I can't work with an audience. The wounded man's eyes found mine. Up close, I could see they weren't pure black, but a deep brown that held flecks of amber near the iris. Eyes that had seen too much, survived too much. Eyes that were currently assessing me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "They stay," he said. His voice was clearer now, stronger despite the blood loss. American accent, I noted distantly. East Coast, educated, cultured. Not what I expected from a man who inspired this level of armed loyalty. "Then at least put the guns away," I countered, surprised at my own boldness. "You're scaring me, and scared doctors make mistakes." Something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect. He nodded once, and the weapons disappeared into shoulder holsters with practiced synchronicity. I turned my attention to the wounds, cutting away his ruined shirt to expose the damage beneath. His torso was lean and muscled, olive-toned skin, marked with scars that told a story of violence survived. Some were old and faded, others relatively fresh. This man was a veteran of whatever war he was fighting. "This will hurt," I warned, reaching for the antiseptic. "I know," he replied simply, and I believed him. As I cleaned the wounds, he didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. His breathing remained controlled, his gaze never leaving my face. It was unnerving, that steady stare, like being examined by something predatory and patient. "You're very calm for someone who just had 3 armed men break into her clinic," he observed. I threaded a curved suture needle, my hands steady now that I was in familiar territory. "I'm compartmentalizing. The panic attack will come later." That earned me a ghost of a smile. Honest. Lying to patients is bad for business. I began the first suture, expecting him to tense. He didn't. "What's your name?" "Dr. Morgan." "Your first name?" I tied off a stitch, precise and neat. "Why does it matter?" "Because you're currently sewing me back together with your hands inside my body," he said. And there was something almost intimate in the way he phrased it. "I'd like to know what to call you." "Isla." The name slipped out before I could stop it. "Isla," he repeated, like he was tasting the syllables. "Island. Solitary. Separate from the mainland." I glanced up sharply. "You know Latin?" "I know many things." His eyes held mine. "For instance, I know you're not just scared, you're terrified, but you're doing this anyway." "Why?" "Because I took an oath," I wanted to say. "Because even monsters deserve medical care. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot how to turn away from suffering, no matter what form it takes. Instead, I said, because the alternative is watching you die on my floor, and I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding that felt too personal, too knowing. "How many?" "How many what?" "How many people have you watched die?" My hands stilled for a moment. The needle hung in the air between us, a silver crescent catching the light. "Enough to know I don't want to add you to the list." I completed the sutures in silence. 17 in total, each one placed with the kind of precision that had once made me one of the top trauma surgeons in the state. That was before I walked away, before I realized that saving lives in an emergency room meant watching just as many slip away despite my best efforts. Before I understood that some wounds cut too deep to heal. "You're very skilled," he said as I bandaged the final wound. "Where did you train? Does it matter? Everything about you matters now." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Not a threat exactly, but a statement of fact. By treating him, by choosing to save his life, I had stepped into his world, whether I wanted to or not. Johns Hopkins, I answered reluctantly. Trauma surgery. I specialized in emergency medicine for 5 years before I trailed off. Before? Before I decided I preferred treating sore throats and twisted ankles. He sat up slowly, testing his mobility. The bandages held. That's quite a career change. What happened? That's none of your business. I stripped off my gloves, disposing of them in the medical waste container with more force than necessary. You need to stay still for at least 48 hours. Keep the wounds dry. Change the dressings daily. You should really go to a hospital for proper monitoring, but I'm guessing that's not an option. You guess correctly. He swung his legs over the edge of the examination table, wincing slightly. I require someone to monitor my recovery, someone skilled and, more importantly, discreet. My stomach dropped. No, absolutely not. I'm willing to compensate you generously. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a slim money clip. Before I could protest, he placed several bills on the metal tray beside my instruments. I glanced down and felt my breath catch. $5,000 in hundreds. I don't make house calls, I said, though my voice had lost its conviction. That money represented 3 months of clinic rent. 3 months where I wouldn't have to choose between paying bills and buying medical supplies. You do now. He stood, taller than I'd realized, at least 6'2" to my 5'6". The small examination room seemed to shrink with his presence. My men will collect you tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Bring whatever supplies you need for wound care. And if I refuse? The lead gunman stepped forward, but the wounded man raised a hand, stopping him. Then I'll respect your choice, he said, and I almost believed him. But know that the men who did this to me saw you. They watched my men bring me here. They know your face now, Dr. Isla Morgan, and unlike me, they won't compensate you for your time. They'll simply eliminate a potential witness. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I had a choice, but only in the technical sense. Stay here and wait for dangerous men to silence me permanently, or accept his protection along with his money. Some choice. What's your name? I asked, needing to know who I was binding myself to. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from brutal to beautiful. Dante Caruso, and Isla, I give you my word that no harm will come to you under my protection. I looked down at the money on the tray, then at the man who had literally crashed through my door and shattered my careful, quiet life. Tomorrow evening, I heard myself say, 7 o'clock. He nodded, satisfaction flickering across his features. Until then. They left the way they'd come, through the broken glass door and into the night. I stood alone in my examination room, covered in blood that wasn't mine, holding money I shouldn't take, committed to a path I knew would lead somewhere dark. I should have called the police, should have reported the break-in, the weapons, the wounded man. Instead, I locked the doors, cleaned the blood from the floor, and taped cardboard over the shattered entrance. The money went into my safe along with my shame. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my small apartment above the clinic, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter. Dante Caruso. The name meant nothing to me, but the way his men had moved, the way they'd deferred to him despite his injuries, spoke of power and authority that went beyond ordinary criminal enterprise. By morning, I had convinced myself that he wouldn't actually come, that it had been a fever dream brought on by stress and exhaustion. I went through my day treating patients with routine complaints, pretending everything was normal, even as I jumped at every sound from the waiting room. At 6:30 that evening, after the last patient had left, I found myself packing a medical bag with supplies I hadn't used since my trauma surgery days. Antibiotics, fresh bandages, suture kits, instruments for debriding infected tissue. I told myself I was being cautious, prepared. The truth was, I was already committed. At precisely 7 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb outside my clinic. The back door opened, but no one got out. The invitation was clear. I locked the clinic door behind me, medical bag in hand, and walked toward the car like a woman walking toward her own execution. The interior was leather and luxury, the kind of vehicle that cost more than I made in a year. One of Dante's men sat in the driver's seat, the same one who had aimed a gun at my chest the night before. He met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his accent marking him as Russian. "Mr. Caruso is grateful for your cooperation." I didn't respond. What could I say? As we drove through the city, leaving behind the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I watched the buildings grow taller, more expensive. We were heading into the financial district, where penthouses sold for tens of millions, and ordinary people like me never ventured except as service workers. The Mercedes pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a glass and steel tower that seemed to pierce the sky. We took a private elevator that required a key card to operate. The numbers climbed, 50 floors, 60, 70, until we reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into a massive living space that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Modern furniture, in shades of gray and black, created clean lines and open spaces. Art that I suspected was worth more than my clinic hung on walls, painted in subtle, sophisticated tones. And there, standing by those impossible windows, backlit by the city he seemed to command, was Dante Caruso. He'd changed into fresh clothes, black slacks, and a charcoal sweater that emphasized his lean build. His dark hair was damp from a recent shower, pushed back from his forehead. Without the blood and violence of our first meeting, he looked younger than I'd thought. Mid-30s, maybe. Handsome in a way that was almost painful to look at directly. "Isla," he said, turning to face me. "Thank you for coming." Did I have a choice? He moved toward me with the fluid grace of someone who had trained their body for violence. "There's always a choice. You could have run, disappeared, changed your name, and started over somewhere else. Most people can't just disappear. Most people aren't being hunted by the Antonov family," he countered. "But I could have arranged it. A new identity, a new life, enough money to start fresh anywhere in the world." I stared at him, processing this information. "Then why didn't you offer that instead?" "Because I wanted you here." The simple honesty in his voice made something flutter in my chest. Not fear, though that was present too. Something more dangerous. "I need to examine your wounds," I said, deflecting. "The bedroom is through here." He led me through the penthouse to a master suite that was larger than my entire apartment. A massive bed dominated the space, its charcoal gray linens perfectly made. He sat on the edge of it, beginning to remove his sweater. I set my medical bag on a nearby chair and pulled on fresh gloves, armor against the intimacy of what I was about to do. Under the warm light of the bedroom, his wounds looked better than I'd expected. No signs of infection, the sutures holding cleanly. You heal quickly, I observed, carefully probing the edges of the wounds. Clean living, he said, and I caught the irony in his tone. Who did this to you? The question emerged before I could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face. Does it matter? It matters if they're going to come after you again, if I'm going to be caught in the crossfire. Fair point. He winced slightly as I applied fresh antiseptic. Alexei Antonov. He's been trying to move in on my territory for the past year. Last night was his way of sending a message. What kind of territory? Even as I asked, I knew I didn't want the answer. The kind that generates enough revenue to afford penthouses and private security. He caught my hand as I reached for a fresh bandage, his fingers warm against my wrist. But more importantly, the kind that makes men like Antonov think they can take what's mine without consequences. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The possessive way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled my hand free, focusing on bandaging his wounds with steady hands. You said they saw me. They did. No sugarcoating, no false reassurance. Which is why you're safer here than anywhere else in the city. My men are stationed throughout the building. No one enters or leaves without my knowledge. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. He stood, testing his mobility, the bandages held perfectly. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. I packed away my supplies, needing something to do with my hands. How long? Until the situation with Antonov is resolved. He moved to a sideboard, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. A few days, a week at most. He offered me one of the glasses. I took it automatically, then stared down at the whiskey like it might contain answers. I have patience, a clinic to run. Already handled. Your receptionist believes you've been called away for a family emergency. Your rent is paid through the next 6 months. Any patients requiring urgent care have been referred to the practice 2 blocks over. The casual way he'd inserted himself into my life, rearranging it to suit his needs, should have infuriated me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of resignation, like I was watching events unfold from a distance. You're very thorough. I protect what's mine, he said again, and this time the words felt weighted with meaning beyond simple possession. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn a path down my throat. I'm not yours. Not yet. The certainty in his voice made me look up sharply. He was watching me with that same intensity from the clinic, like he could see through skin and bone to something deeper. But you will be. Before I could respond, before I could process that arrogant statement, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. I need to take this. Make yourself comfortable. The guest room is down the hall. Everything you need should be there. He left me alone in his bedroom, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly in what I now recognized as Italian. I stood there for a moment, whiskey glass in hand, surrounded by luxury and danger in equal measure, wondering how my careful, controlled life had spun so completely out of my control in less than 24 hours. The guest room was, predictably, more beautiful than any space I'd ever inhabited. A king bed with silk sheets, an ensuite bathroom with marble everything, a walk-in closet that had been stocked with women's clothing in approximately my size. I should have been disturbed by the preparation, the presumption. Instead, I was too tired to feel anything beyond a bone-deep exhaustion. I showered, washing away the day's tension under water pressure that felt like a massage. When I emerged, wrapped in a robe that probably cost more than my monthly salary, I found a tray of food waiting on a small table by the window. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. Someone had been in my room while I showered. The violation of privacy should have alarmed me. It didn't. I was too hungry. I ate mechanically, watching the city lights blur and refocus through the window. Somewhere out there was my clinic, my apartment, my small, safe life. It felt impossibly far away now, like something that had happened to someone else. When I finally collapsed into the silk sheets, I expected to lie awake all night, mind racing with everything that had happened. Instead, I fell into sleep like falling into dark water, pulled under by exhaustion and the strange sense that, despite everything, I was exactly where I was meant to be. I woke to the sound of breaking glass and raised voices echoing through the penthouse. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Dante, the wounds, the forced sanctuary in this glass tower above the city. The silk sheets tangled around my legs as I stumbled from the bed, pulse hammering. More voices speaking rapid Italian, the tone unmistakably urgent. I pulled on the robe and moved to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. 3 of our warehouses, Dante. 3 in one night. This isn't a message anymore. It's a declaration of war. That was a voice I didn't recognize. Male, older, carrying the weight of authority that came from years of violence survived. Then we respond accordingly. Dante's voice, cold as winter steel. I want every asset we have on the street. I want to know where Antonov is breathing, eating, sleeping. I want... He broke off abruptly, and I realized the voices had moved closer to my door. I stepped back just as it swung open. Dante stood in the doorway, still dressed in last night's clothes, his dark eyes taking in my disheveled appearance with an intensity that made me acutely aware of how little the robe concealed. Behind him, I could see at least a dozen men in the living room, all armed, all turning to look at me with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Isla," he said quietly, "I apologize for the noise. There's been a development." I gathered that. I pulled the robe tighter. "Are you hurt?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that my first question was about his well-being rather than my own safety. "No, but I need to leave for a few hours. Marco will stay with you." A massive man detached himself from the group, moving with surprising grace for someone built like a concrete wall. His face was scarred, nose clearly broken at least twice, but his eyes held an unexpected gentleness. "I don't need a babysitter," I said, though the protest felt hollow even to my own ears. "You need protection." Dante stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Antonov struck at 3 of my properties last night. He's escalating, which means he'll come for anything he thinks I value." The implication hung between us, heavy and inescapable. By bringing me here, by involving me in his world, Dante had painted a target on my back, whether I wanted it or not. "I barely know you," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Why would he think you value me?" Dante's hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that contradicted everything I knew about him. "Because I do." Before I could respond, before I could process what that simple statement meant, he was gone. The penthouse emptied of armed men, like water draining from a sink, leaving only Marco and me in the sudden, echoing silence. You should eat, Marco said in heavily accented English. I will make breakfast. I followed him to the kitchen, a space of gleaming stainless steel and marble that looked like it had never been used. Marco moved through it with practiced efficiency, pulling ingredients from the sub-zero refrigerator with the confidence of someone who actually knew how to cook. How long have you worked for Dante? I asked, settling onto a bar stool at the massive island. 15 years. He cracked eggs into a bowl with one massive hand. Since he was 20 years old and had nothing but anger and ambition. What happened 15 years ago? Marco glanced at me, assessing. That is his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this. Dante Caruso is not the man people think he is. What kind of man is he? Loyal, ruthless when necessary, but never cruel without reason. He poured the eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence. He could have killed you that night at your clinic, could have simply taken what he needed and eliminated a witness. Instead, he protected you. By forcing me to come here. By ensuring you would live long enough to hate him for it. Marco slid a perfect omelet onto a plate, adding fresh fruit and toast with the care of someone plating a Michelin star meal. Eat. You will need your strength. The food was delicious, but I could barely taste it. My mind kept replaying Dante's words, the way his touch had been both possessive and gentle, the look in his eyes that suggested I had become something more than a convenient doctor, something dangerous. I was finishing the last of my coffee when Marco's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message, his massive frame going rigid with tension. What is it? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. We need to move you. Now. My blood turned to ice. Why? What's happened? Antonov's men. They've located this building. He was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments I hadn't known existed. They're on their way up. The world tilted sideways. Up? How? I thought this place was secure. Someone talked. Someone always talks. Marco handed me a burner phone. Dante's number is programmed. If anything happens to me, you call him. Understand? I nodded, throat too tight for words. The phone felt like a live grenade in my hand. Marco moved to the door, positioning himself with the tactical precision of someone who had done this many times before. Stay in the bedroom. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Marco. Now, Dr. Morgan. I ran. The guest bedroom door locked behind me with a solid click that sounded like the ceiling of a tomb. I pressed my back against it, phone clutched in shaking hands, listening to the terrible silence of waiting for violence to arrive. It didn't take long. The first gunshot made me flinch so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Then more. A rapid percussion that turned the air into thunder. I heard Marco shouting in Russian, heard the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor, heard the sounds of fighting that belonged in movies, not in real life. Then, sickeningly, I heard Marco scream. My medical training warred with my survival instinct. Someone was hurt. Someone needed help. But opening that door meant exposing myself to whoever had hurt Marco, meant potentially dying before I could help anyone. The decision was made for me when the bedroom door exploded inward, the lock shattering under the force of a steel-toed boot. 3 men poured into the room, all armed, all moving with the coordinated efficiency of professional soldiers. I backed toward the window, phone still clutched uselessly in my hand. The lead man was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with cold blue eyes and a smile that made my skin crawl. He said something in Russian to his companions, and they laughed. I didn't need a translation to understand the predatory nature of that amusement. "Dr. Morgan," he said in heavily accented English, "Mr. Antonov would like a word." I have nothing to say to him. That's unfortunate. He moved closer, gun trained on my chest with casual precision. Because he has many questions about Dante Caruso, and you're going to answer them. Behind him, I could see into the living room. Marco lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The sight made my vision blur with rage and fear in equal measure. "If you've killed him, then he died doing his job." The Russian grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "Now you'll do yours. Come quietly, and maybe Antonov will let you live when he's done with you." The burner phone was still in my other hand. I brought it up and smashed it into his face with every ounce of strength I possessed. The glass screen shattered, drawing blood from his temple. His grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I ran, not toward the door. That way was blocked by his companions. Instead, I ran toward the massive windows overlooking the city 70 floors below. It was insane, suicidal. But my mind had narrowed to a single, desperate thought. I would rather die on my own terms than at the hands of men who saw me as nothing more than leverage. My shoulder hit the glass hard enough to make stars explode behind my eyes. The window held, of course. This was reinforced glass designed to withstand hurricane-force winds. But the impact bought me precious seconds as the Russians recovered from their surprise. That's when I heard it. The sound of an elevator arriving. The distinctive ping that, in this moment, sounded like salvation or damnation. Dante Caruso stepped into his penthouse like an avenging angel carved from darkness and fury. He took in the scene with a single sweep of those dark eyes. Marco on the floor, the Russians in his bedroom, me pressed against the window with blood on my hands and terror in my face. His expression didn't change. That was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. "You have 5 seconds to release her," he said quietly. "After that, you die slowly." The Russian, holding his bleeding temple, laughed, a sound without humor. "You're outnumbered, Caruso, outgunned. Antonov owns this city now." 4 seconds. Behind Dante, I saw more of his men pouring from the elevator, weapons drawn. The numbers had shifted dramatically. The Russians saw it too, their confidence evaporating like morning dew under a merciless sun. 3 seconds. The lead Russian made his decision. He lunged for me, gun coming up, clearly planning to use me as a human shield. He never made it. Dante moved with a speed that defied logic, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His hand caught the Russian's wrist, twisting with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the floor. Then, Dante's other hand was at the man's throat, and I saw something in his face that made my blood run cold. This was the real Dante Caruso, not the cultured man who poured whiskey in crystal glasses, not the patient who had let me stitch his wounds without complaint. This was the predator beneath the polish, the killer who had built an empire on the bones of his enemies. "You came into my home," Dante said softly, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "You touched what's mine. You made her bleed." I looked down at my hands. Blood from the shattered phone screen had cut my palm. It seemed like such a small thing compared to the violence unfolding before me. What happened next happened fast. Dante said something in Italian, and his men moved like a choreographed dance of death. The Russians were disarmed, subdued, dragged from the penthouse with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. All except the one Dante held. Him, Dante kept, his hand still at the man's throat, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult but not impossible. "Tell Antonov," Dante said, his face inches from the Russians, "that if he wants war, he'll have it. But when I'm done, there won't be enough of his organization left to fill a coffin." He released the man, who stumbled backward, gasping. Then Dante's fist connected with his face. Once, twice, 3 times, with mechanical precision. The Russian crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. Only then did Dante turn to me. The monster retreated, replaced by something almost human again. Almost. His eyes were still dark with violence, barely contained. His breathing controlled, but elevated, adrenaline singing through his veins. "Isla." He crossed to me in 3 strides, his hands gentle as they took mine, examining the cuts on my palm. "You're hurt." "Marco," I managed, my voice coming out strangled. "He's alive, breathing, but he needs your help." The words snapped me out of my shock. I pushed past Dante, dropping to my knees beside Marco's massive form. He'd taken at least 3 bullets, shoulder, abdomen, thigh, all potentially fatal if left untreated, but survivable if I worked fast. "I need my medical bag," I said, my hands already assessing the damage with practiced efficiency. "And I need proper supplies, more than what I brought." "Already on the way." Dante was on his phone, speaking rapidly in Italian. "Anything you need, it's yours." I worked on Marco while Dante's men cleaned the apartment of any evidence of what had transpired. The bullets needed to come out, but I couldn't do major surgery here, not without proper equipment. I did what I could, stopped the bleeding, stabilized him, pumped him full of antibiotics and pain medication that would knock out someone half his size. "He needs a hospital," I said finally, sitting back on my heels, exhausted, and covered in blood that definitely wasn't mine this time. "Not possible." Dante's hand was on my shoulder, steady and warm. "But I have a surgeon on retainer. He'll be here within the hour." "A surgeon on retainer," I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Of course you do." "Isla, look at me." I did. His face was softer now, the violence receded, leaving only concern and something else, something that looked dangerously like affection. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I thought I had more time before Antonov moved against me here. I should have taken you somewhere safer." "There is nowhere safer, is there?" The realization settled over me like a shroud. "As long as I'm connected to you, I'm a target." Yes. At least he was honest. I appreciated that more than false reassurance would have warranted. "Then what do we do?" I asked, bone-tired and covered in the blood of a man who had tried to protect me. Dante's hand moved from my shoulder to cup my face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. "We end this. Permanently. Tonight." "How?" His smile was cold and full of promise. "By giving Antonov exactly what he wants." The surgeon arrived an hour later, a nervous man in his 60s who took one look at Marco and got to work with the kind of focused intensity I recognized from my own trauma surgery days. I assisted, falling into the familiar rhythm of surgery despite the surreal circumstances, operating on a gangster in a penthouse instead of in a sterile OR. Marco survived. The bullets came out, the wounds were closed, and his massive frame was moved to a bedroom where he could recover under the watchful eye of 2 of Dante's men who had apparently received combat medical training. I scrubbed Marco's blood from my hands in Dante's bathroom, watching the water run pink in the marble sink. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, hair wild, eyes too bright with adrenaline and fear, the white robe now stained with evidence of the violence I'd just survived. When I emerged, Dante was waiting. He'd changed clothes, now dressed all in black like he was going to a funeral. Maybe he was. Maybe he was planning to create several. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "Something that goes against everything you believe in." "What?" He moved closer, and I could smell the expensive cologne that clung to his skin, see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I need you to trust me, completely. For the next few hours, I need you to believe that everything I do is to protect you, even if it seems otherwise." Fear clutched at my chest. "Dante, what are you planning?" "Something that will end this war before anyone else gets hurt." His hand found mine, lacing our fingers together. "But it requires bait, and I'm afraid that bait is you." I should have pulled away, should have refused, should have demanded he find another way, any other way that didn't involve using me as a pawn in his deadly game. But looking into his eyes, I saw something that stopped my protest before it could form. He was terrified. Not for himself. I doubted Dante Caruso had feared for his own life in years. But for me, the realization hit with the force of a physical blow. This dangerous man who commanded armies and built empires on blood and power was afraid of losing me. A woman he'd known for barely 48 hours. A woman who, by all rights, should mean nothing to him. "Tell me the plan," I said finally, and watched relief flood his features. What he outlined was insane, suicidal. It involved me walking willingly into Antonov's territory, wearing a wire, drawing the Russian out so Dante's men could end him. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to find another way, to preserve the last shreds of the Hippocratic oath I had once sworn. But as I looked around at the blood still staining the floor where Marco had fallen, at the shattered remains of my phone embedded in the wall, at the life I'd lost the moment I chose to treat a wounded stranger who crashed through my door, I realized the choice had been made long ago. Maybe the moment our eyes met in my clinic. Maybe even before that, on some level I couldn't articulate, when the universe decided to drag me out of my self-imposed exile and force me back into the world of blood and broken things. "When do we start?" I asked. Dante's smile was equal parts admiration and regret. He pulled me close, his arms encircling me with a possessiveness that should have alarmed me, but instead felt like coming home. "Tonight," he whispered against my hair. "And Isla, when this is over, when you're safe, I'm going to tell you exactly why you've become the most dangerous thing in my world." "Why dangerous?" He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, and what I saw there stole my breath. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and love makes even the most powerful men vulnerable." The wire they fitted me with was smaller than I expected, barely larger than a button, tucked beneath the silk blouse they'd provided. Black, expensive, the kind of thing a woman might wear to seduce or to die in. I supposed both were possible tonight. Dante's tech specialist, a wiry man named Chen, who spoke in monosyllables, tested the equipment 3 times before nodding his approval. Every word I spoke would be transmitted to Dante and his team positioned around Antonov's warehouse. Every breath would be monitored. Every scream would be heard. That last thought made my hands shake as I fastened the delicate silver necklace that held a backup tracking device. Insurance, Dante had called it. I called it evidence of how badly this could go wrong. You don't have to do this. Dante appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, and for a moment I saw past the armor of his power to the man beneath. The one who had lain bleeding in my clinic, who had held me with surprising gentleness, who had just confessed feelings that terrified him as much as they terrified me. I can find another way. There's always another way. I turned to face him fully, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. This was what vulnerability looked like on a man like Dante Caruso. Not weakness, but a willingness to be wounded for the sake of something that mattered more than survival. No, I said quietly. There isn't. You know it and I know it. Antonov won't stop until one of you is dead, or until he has leverage that makes you yield. I refuse to be the reason you surrender something you've built with blood and sacrifice. You're already the reason I'd surrender everything. He crossed to me, his hands framing my face with a reverence that felt like prayer. In 2 days, you've become the thing I didn't know I was missing. The piece that makes all of this, he gestured vaguely at the opulence surrounding us, means something beyond power and revenge. I leaned into his touch, memorizing the warmth of his palms against my skin. Then let me help you end this. Let me be more than something you protect. Let me be someone who fights beside you. His laugh was soft and edged with pain. You don't know what you're asking. The things I'll have to do tonight. The man you'll see me become. I already know who you are, I interrupted. I've known since the moment you crashed through my door. You're a killer, a criminal, a man who built an empire on the suffering of others. But you're also the man who said please when you asked me to stay, who paid 6 months of my rent without being asked, who protected Marco even when it meant exposing yourself to danger. You contain multitudes, Dante Caruso, and I'm not afraid of any of them. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then he kissed me, and it wasn't gentle. It was desperate and claiming, a brand that marked me as irrevocably his as any ring or vow could have. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. When this is over, he whispered, I'm taking you away from all of this. Somewhere quiet, where no one knows my name, and you can practice medicine without armed guards watching your patients. Somewhere we can be ordinary. The fantasy was beautiful and impossible, and we both knew it. Men like Dante Caruso didn't retire to quiet lives. They died in the game they'd chosen, or they ruled until age, or betrayal brought them down. But I didn't say that. Instead, I kissed him once more, soft and lingering, storing the memory against whatever darkness waited ahead. I'll hold you to that promise, I said, and pretended not to see the shadow that crossed his face. The warehouse district at night was a landscape from a nightmare, all rusted metal and broken glass, shadows deep enough to hide armies. Antonov had chosen his ground well, industrial, isolated, with enough exits that escape was possible, but enough obstacles that an assault would be costly. The car that delivered me was different from the Mercedes that had collected me from my clinic. This one was older, dented, unremarkable. The kind of vehicle that wouldn't draw attention in this neighborhood where attention meant police or rival, gangs or both. The driver, not one of Dante's regular men, but someone hired for this specific purpose, stopped 3 blocks from the warehouse. This is as far as I go, he said in accented English. Walk straight, don't run. They're already watching. I stepped out into air that smelled of oil and decay, my heels clicking against broken pavement with each step. The wire beneath my blouse felt like it was burning, a constant reminder that Dante was listening, that I wasn't truly alone, even though every instinct screamed that I was walking toward death with nothing but faith in a man I barely knew. Two men materialized from the shadows as I approached the warehouse entrance. They patted me down with professional efficiency, hands lingering longer than necessary in a violation that made my skin crawl. One of them found the necklace, examined it with suspicious eyes. "Pretty," he said in heavily accented English. "From Caruso?" "From my grandmother," I lied smoothly. "She died last year. It's all I have left of her." He studied me for another moment, then surprisingly fastened it back around my neck. "Antonov is waiting." The warehouse interior was vast and largely empty, the kind of space that amplified every sound. My footsteps echoed off concrete and metal as they led me deeper into the structure. Industrial lights hung from chains, casting pools of harsh illumination separated by expanses of shadow. In the center of the space, a chair sat in the largest pool of light. Not for me, I realized. For display, for theater. Alexei Antonov stood beside it, and he was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined someone brutal and thuggish, violence written in every line of his body. Instead, he was almost beautiful, tall and lean, with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of ice. He wore an expensive suit that rivaled anything in Dante's wardrobe, and when he smiled at my approach, it was with genuine warmth that somehow made him more terrifying than any scowl could have. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his English nearly accentless. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I didn't realize I had a choice." His laugh was cultured, refined. "There is always a choice, dear doctor. You could have refused, and my men would have killed you quickly. Instead, you chose to walk into uncertainty. That shows character." He gestured to the chair. When I didn't move, two of his men took my arms, not roughly, but with unmistakable firmness, and guided me into the seat. Rope appeared, binding my wrists to the arms of the chair, my ankles to its legs. The wire beneath my blouse felt like it was broadcasting my terror to the world. "I'm going to ask you questions," Antonov said, pulling up a second chair and sitting across from me like we were having tea rather than conducting an interrogation. "You're going to answer them truthfully. If I believe you're lying, things will become unpleasant. If you cooperate, you'll leave here alive. Those are the terms. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good." He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other in a pose of complete relaxation. "First question, where does Dante Caruso keep his financial records?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to ask about Dante's movements, his associates, his weaknesses. Instead, he wanted the empire itself, the infrastructure that kept power flowing. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm a doctor. He doesn't share that kind of information with me." Antonov's expression didn't change. Second question, how many men guard his penthouse at any given time? Another question I could answer truthfully. "I don't know exact numbers. I saw maybe 20 the night you attacked." Third question, and this one is important, Dr. Morgan, so think carefully before you answer. He leaned forward, his pale eyes boring into mine. "Why does Dante Caruso value you enough to start a war over your safety?" The real question beneath the question. Not what did I know, but what did I mean? Why was I worth the cost he was paying? "You'd have to ask him," I said softly. "I'm just a doctor who treated his wounds." "Just a doctor." Antonov's smile widened. "Who he brought to his private residence, who he protects with armed guards, who he's willing to trade territory for." He stood, circling behind me, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. No, Dr. Morgan, you're not just anything. You're the crack in Dante Caruso's armor, the weakness he didn't know he had until it was too late. His hand settled on my shoulder, and I fought not to flinch. Here's what's going to happen. In approximately 15 minutes, Dante will realize you've been here too long without communication. He'll come for you, because men like him can't help themselves when something they value is threatened. And when he does, I'll be waiting with enough firepower to end the Caruso empire once and for all. You're using me as bait, I said, and felt sick at the confirmation of what I'd already known. Just as he used you as bait for me. Antonov's hand squeezed gently, almost affectionately. We're not so different, Dante and I. We both understand that in this business, everything is currency. Money, power, loyalty, and yes, love. All of it can be traded for the right price. He moved back into my line of sight, checking his watch with the casual air of someone timing a roast in the oven rather than an ambush. The difference is that I'm willing to sacrifice anything for victory. Dante has developed a conscience, and that makes him weak. It makes him predictable. It makes him... The explosion that rocked the warehouse cut off whatever he'd been about to say. Not close enough to harm us, but near enough that dust rained from the ceiling and the lights swayed on their chains. Antonov's expression transformed from cultured amusement to cold fury in an instant. "Report!" he barked into a radio, speaking Russian too rapid for me to follow, even if I'd understood the language. The response made his face go white. He looked at me with new understanding, with something that might have been respect if it wasn't overshadowed by rage. "Clever," he said softly. "Very clever. The wire wasn't for him to track you. It was for you to mark us." I didn't understand until I saw the red dots appearing on the chests of Antonov's men. Laser sights, dozens of them, painting targets that wouldn't miss. The warehouse that had seemed so isolated, so secure, was suddenly revealed as the trap it truly was. Dante hadn't come to rescue me. He'd let Antonov collect me, had listened to every word through the wire, had positioned his forces while Antonov focused on the bait. "You let him use you," Antonov said, and there was almost admiration in his voice. "Knowing he was using you, that's either bravery or stupidity, and I'm not certain which." "Neither," I said, finding my voice stronger than I expected. "It's trust." The word hung in the air between us, more powerful than any weapon. Antonov stared at me for a long moment, then surprisingly, he laughed. "Then I hope for your sake that trust isn't misplaced, Dr. Morgan. Because if Dante Caruso fails tonight, you'll die with him." What happened next happened fast. Dante's voice echoed through the warehouse, amplified by speakers I couldn't see. "Alexei, it's over. Let her go, and I'll let you walk away." Antonov pulled a gun from his jacket, pressing it to my temple with a casualness that suggested this was far from the first time he'd held someone hostage. "You'll let me walk away? How generous! What's to stop me from killing her and taking my chances with your men? The fact that I know where your daughter lives." Dante's voice was cold, empty of everything except absolute certainty. "Anna Antonova, age 16, attending the international school in Geneva. If Dr. Morgan dies, so does she. And unlike you, I won't make it quick." The silence that followed was profound. I felt Antonov's hand tremble against my head, saw something crack in that perfect facade of control. A daughter. He had a daughter, and Dante had found her. "You wouldn't," Antonov said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm willing to burn the entire world to keep her safe." Dante's voice softened, became almost gentle. "But I don't want to. I'm tired, Alexei. Tired of the war, tired of the blood, tired of becoming the thing my father would have despised. So I'm offering you something I've never offered anyone, a way out that doesn't end in death." "What are you proposing?" "You leave. Tonight. You take your daughter, and you disappear. I keep New York, you take whatever you can carry, and we both walk away from this alive." I could feel Antonov calculating, weighing the offer against his pride, his ambition, the empire he'd hoped to claim. The gun at my temple wavered. "And if I refuse? Then we all die here. Me, you, Dr. Morgan, and everyone we value. Because I'm done negotiating with men who threaten what's mine." The warehouse held its breath. The red dots multiplied, covering every one of Antonov's men, painting the scene in scarlet warning. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the metal of the gun cold against my skin, could taste copper fear in my mouth. "You've changed," Antonov said finally, and the gun lowered. The Dante Caruso I knew 2 years ago would have killed me the moment he had the advantage. That Dante Caruso hadn't met Dr. Isla Morgan. The rope binding me fell away, cut by one of Antonov's men at a gesture from his boss. I stood on shaking legs, and Dante was there, materializing from the shadows as if he'd been waiting for permission to reclaim what was his. His arms went around me, and I felt the tension vibrating through his frame, the barely controlled violence that wanted release but was being held in check by will alone. "Go," Dante said to Antonov over my head, "before I change my mind." I didn't see Antonov leave. I was too focused on the man holding me, on the way his heart hammered against my ear, on the whispered words in Italian that I didn't need to understand to recognize as prayers of gratitude. When we finally pulled apart, the warehouse was empty except for Dante's men. The threat evaporated like smoke. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the tracks of tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I put you through that." "You kept your promise," I said. "You kept me safe." "At what cost?" His voice broke on the words. "You'll never look at me the same way again. You heard what I threatened, what I'm capable of. A child, Isla. I threatened a child to save you." I thought about that, about the man who had been willing to burn the world, who had found the one thing Antonov valued more than power and used it as leverage. It should have horrified me, should have confirmed every terrible thing I knew about the world he inhabited. Instead, I found myself understanding something fundamental about love and violence, about the impossible choices we make when something matters more than our own morality. "Would you have done it?" I asked. "If he'd killed me, would you have hurt her?" Dante's silence was answer enough. He'd been bluffing, using the threat of something he'd never actually do to protect me. It was still manipulation, still a glimpse into the darkness he carried. But it was also proof that somewhere beneath the killer, the criminal, the man who commanded through fear, there was still someone capable of mercy. "Take me home," I said. Not to my apartment, not to my clinic, to wherever he was, because somehow, in the space of 72 hours, Dante Caruso had become my definition of safe. The penthouse was quiet when we returned, Marco recovering in one room, guards posted discreetly at every entrance and exit. Dante led me to his bedroom, not the guest room where I'd slept before, but his private sanctuary. It felt significant, like crossing a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. He helped me out of the wire, his hands gentle as he lifted the silk blouse over my head, careful not to hurt me, even though I was the one who was uninjured. I stood before him in nothing but my vulnerability, and when he looked at me, I saw everything he'd been holding back. Fear and relief and need and love, all tangled together into something so intense it took my breath away. "I can't go back," I said softly, "to who I was before, to the small, safe life I'd built for myself." "I know." He pulled me close, and his skin was warm against mine. "I'm sorry for that, too." "Don't be." I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. That life was an escape, a way to avoid feeling anything too deeply, because feeling meant risking the kind of pain that almost destroyed me when James died. But you made me feel again, made me remember what it was like to be alive instead of just surviving. Even knowing what I am, especially knowing what you are. I traced the line of his jaw, feeling the tension there. Because you showed me that love doesn't have to be safe or simple or clean. Sometimes it's messy and dangerous and built on foundations that should crumble, but that doesn't make it any less real. He kissed me then, and it was different from before. Not desperate or claiming, but tender. A promise that whatever came next, we'd face it together. We made love slowly, carefully, mapping each other's scars, his physical, mine emotional, and finding strange comfort in the damage we'd both survived. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled of expensive detergent and him, watching dawn break over the city he ruled. The light was soft and golden, painting everything in shades of hope that seemed impossible given everything that had transpired. "I meant what I said," Dante murmured against my hair, "about taking you away. When the dust settles, when things are stable." "We both know that day will never come," I interrupted gently. "Men like you don't retire, Dante. This is who you are, what you've built, and I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you, even knowing it means living with guards and threats and the constant possibility of violence." "Why?" The question was raw, vulnerable. "Why would you choose this?" I thought about my answer, wanting to get it right. "Because you saw me when I'd spent 2 years trying to be invisible. Because you trusted me with your wounds and your weakness. Because when you had the chance to let me go, to keep me safe by pushing me away, you couldn't do it." I turned in his arms to face him. "And because I'm tired of being afraid, of playing it safe, of letting fear make my choices for me." "That's a terrible reason to fall in love with a criminal." "Then it's lucky I have others." I kissed him softly. "You made me feel alive again. That's worth any risk." We stayed like that as the sun climbed higher, 2 damaged people who had found something unexpected in each other's darkness. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd once dreamed of with James, all white picket fences and suburban normalcy. But it was real and raw and mine. The knock on the door came mid-morning, Marco moving slowly, but under his own power, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. "The council wants to meet," he said to Dante. "They've heard about Antonov. They want to know your intentions." Dante's arms tightened around me momentarily before he released me, reaching for the clothes he'd discarded the night before. "Tell them I'll be there within the hour." After Marco left, I watched Dante transform. The tender man who had held me through the night disappeared, replaced by the Caruso heir, the king of this dark empire. He dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than a car, his movements precise and controlled. By the time he finished, He looked every inch the powerful man who commanded respect through fear and loyalty in equal measure. "Come with me," he said, and it wasn't a question. The council meeting was held in a building I didn't recognize, all dark wood and leather and old money. Men in expensive suits filled a conference room, their eyes tracking me with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion as Dante led me to a seat at his right hand. I was the only woman present, and from their expressions, that was both unusual and unwelcome. Dante didn't seem to notice or care. He laid out what had happened, the attack on his properties, the threat to me, the confrontation with Antonov. When he finished, the room erupted in argument. Voices raised in Italian and English, debating strategy and consequences and the implications of letting a rival walk away. One man, older than the rest, with silver threading through his dark hair, stood. The room fell silent. "You let him go," he said, his accent marking him as Sicilian. "You had every advantage, every reason to eliminate a threat to your power, and you let him walk away. Why?" Dante's hand found mine under the table, his fingers lacing through mine with gentle pressure. "Because I'm done sacrificing everything for power. Because there's more to life than empire and revenge. Because—" He paused, and I felt him gather himself. "Because the woman I love asked me to choose mercy." The silence that followed was profound. The older man's eyes moved from Dante to me, assessment clear in his gaze. "You know what they'll say," he said finally, "that you've gone soft, that love has made you weak. Let them." Dante's voice was steady, certain. "I've spent 15 years building this empire on blood and fear. I'm not abandoning it, but I'm not letting it consume me either. If that makes me weak in their eyes, so be it." The older man studied us both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "Not of the empire you've built. He would have expected that. But of the man you've become. That, I think, would have pleased him greatly." The tension in the room shifted, others nodding their agreement, or at least their acceptance. As the meeting continued, discussing logistics and territory and the 1,000 details that kept an empire running, I sat beside Dante and realized something profound. He hadn't chosen between his world and me. He'd found a way to have both, to be both the ruthless leader his position required and the man capable of love and mercy that I'd glimpsed beneath the armor. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more threats, more violence, more impossible choices. But as I sat there with his hand in mine, surrounded by the machinery of his power, I knew I'd made the right choice. Not the safe one, not the sane one, but the one that made me feel alive for the first time since I'd lost James. We left the meeting as the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of amber and rose. In the car, Dante pulled me close, and I rested my head on his shoulder, exhausted but strangely at peace. "No regrets?" he asked softly. I thought about my clinic, my quiet life, the safety I'd built around myself like a fortress. Then I thought about the past 3 days, about feeling terror and passion and purpose in equal measure. "None," I said, and meant it. "This is where I'm meant to be." Even knowing what it costs? Especially knowing what it costs. I lifted my head to meet his eyes. "Because you're worth it, we're worth it, and I'm done letting fear make my decisions." He kissed me as the car wound through evening traffic, and I tasted promise and danger and future in equal measure. When we finally broke apart, he was smiling, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. "I love you, Isla Morgan," he said. "God help us both." but I do. I love you too, Dante Caruso. I settled back against him, watching the city lights begin to glow in the growing darkness. And I think we're going to be okay. It was a lie. We both knew it. In this world of violence and power, there were no guarantees, no happily ever afters that didn't come with costs too high to name. But as we drove through the city, he ruled, and I'd chosen to share. I allowed myself to believe it anyway. Because sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is love someone despite knowing exactly how much we stand to lose. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose love over fear, connection over safety, and hope that it's enough to light our way through whatever darkness comes next. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.